one of the things I've discovered is that people who are hyper successful become terrified of letting people into their life because they're not really sure if people love them or the benefit of being near them. And so if you don't develop the value of relationships early, it's almost impossible to develop them when you're successful.
The wealthy are in a position to be able to help people. And you can criticize how people are helping people, but at least they're in the position to be able to help somebody. And if you can get in that position, you have the ability to be able to help people as well. And again, with our community, that's something we promote massively, is like, get yourself in a position to be able to help people.
Yeah, I just think that if you have the capacity to create wealth, it's a lack of responsibility to not create it. Because people don't have the same capacity. There are people smarter than me, people more talented than me, people more gifted than me. And there are perhaps people I'm more gifted or more talented or more intelligent than. And you can't measure people equally. You have to take responsibility and stewardship for what you have. And somebody was born in Ethiopia. They do not have the opportunities that you have when you're born in Los Angeles. They might have the same intellectual capacity or talent, or innate capacity, but not have the opportunity. If you have the opportunity, to me, you have the responsibility. And this guy graduated from UCLA, and when he graduated, he said, I don't know what to do now, and his parents spent so much money on his school. And I said, you mean, what do you mean? He goes, to pay the bills. I said, you just graduated from UCLA and your parents spent a few $100,000 to send you to school, and your entire motive in life is to pay the bills. You need to create a company that provides 1,000 people with jobs, so that you're providing 4,000 people with meals, so that all of these families have roofs over their heads and food on the table and an opportunity for them to live their greatest dreams. If you have the capacity, to me, you have the responsibility.
Wow. It's interesting you say that. It's just reminded me of my dad. So my dad wasn't in our lives, at all. Single. My mum's amazing. 7 kids, by herself. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And we were boisterous. There's 5 boys. Like we were pretty hectic. But my dad, he had that capacity to build wealth, and he's from nothing, and he can, he can. Like build a company, he'd crash it pretty quickly, but he could build these companies up, and and he had that capacity to build wealth, but he didn't have the empathy or I don't know, the ethics to turn it to good. There was, so where does that come from? Like, and the I don't know. It's a difficult one. Like, do we decide to do good, or we're born into a situation where we don't understand what good is? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, actually, it's one of the things that drove me to write Mindshift was that 2 things. One is I felt like more people were afraid of failure than success. And ironically, fewer people crumble under the weight of failure than crumble under the weight of success. And if you don't develop the internal infrastructure, the character base to handle great success, you will use all of that power and wealth, fame, whatever you have, for your own good. And you'll become basically a black hole where everything is being consumed by your desire, by your greed, by your lust. And everyone around you gets consumed by you rather than having everything around you actually flourish. And so one of the reasons I wrote Mindshift, and the first Mindshift in the book, is it's all about people. What you're describing when someone has great wealth and they destroy all the relationships around them is someone who actually didn't mature. When you're small, and I write about this in chapter 1, you see life as all about things. And so it's toys. And then when you watch children play, they're all fighting over the same toy. There might be 20 toys, but the only toy that has value is the other toy that some kid has. And when you're small, you think life is about things. As you mature, you shift from things to experiences. You think life is all about experiences. It's the first kiss, your first date, your first, whatever football game, your first, goal. Everything is about experiences in life. And then if you mature, it moves from things to experiences to relationships. But the problem is a lot of people get older, but they never grow up. So they're still about things. It's just not Legos. It's Lamborghinis. Life is still about things. Or they grow to the adolescent stage where it's still about experiences. It's just not a first date. It's owning a yacht and a plane and traveling the world and going to Mars. And you just have to have another experience and another experience and another experience, because life is still all about experiences, which is, by the way, why a lot of times hyper successful people get married 4 or 5 or 6 times, because it's not about the relationship. It's about the experience that other person can create for you. But if you mature, you go from things to experiences to relationships. It doesn't mean you still don't have things. Of course you have things. And it doesn't mean you don't have experiences. You have even better experiences. But now life is all about relationships. And I think what you're describing with your father is someone who achieved great success, but never matured to the place where he realized it's all about people. And it's one of the driving principles. The first mastermind I think I spoke to during the pandemic, because all of these guys didn't care about the pandemic. They were super wealthy, and they were making more money during the pandemic than before the pandemic. And so they asked me to come and speak to them. And I remember getting up there and saying, I'm not going to teach you how to get rich. I'm going to teach you how to not to die alone. Because they were all richer than me, but they were also all alone. And I have this mastermind that I lead now, and it really started because I sat down with a guy who, when he was 29, had his first $100 million company. And I think actually became a $1 billion company. And then he lost it all because his board fired him because he was such a jerk, and from his own description. And then he spent the next year rebuilding another $100 million company. So he's very good at what he does. And I'm at this event, and I see him, and we sit down together, and we start a conversation. And I remember I looked at him and he asked me, what do you see? And I said, what I see is that you're going to die alone. You've made choices in your life where you do not allow anyone within the inner circle of who you really are. No one sees you, no one knows you. You communicate a message to everyone, stay away from me. And later on that day, another guy who was super successful came and said, hey, that guy told me you talked to him, that you slapped him around, and he used more colorful language. And that night he said, I told my friends, I can't believe he talked to me this way. No one talks to me this way. And then a couple hours later, he came and said, what do I do? So I started my mastermind, and I said, say yes. Say yes to people who invite you into their lives. And he signed up within 30 seconds. And one of the things I've discovered is that people who are hyper successful become terrified of letting people into their life because they're not really sure if people love them or the benefit of being near them. And so if you don't develop the value of relationships early, it's almost impossible to develop them when you're successful. It's just like the person who says, I'll be generous when I'm rich, but right now I'm too poor to be generous. If you don't learn generosity when you're poor, you will never become generous when you're rich. The values that you want to take and scale, you need them at the beginning.
As many of you know, we are independent creators and filmmakers, but there is a massive attack on us right now. Traditional media over the last few years has started to slowly die. They are no longer the independent voice that you first thought they were. That's why we've created Mulligan Brothers Patreon. We've built something special for our most dedicated supporters, and I want to break it down for you real quick. The supporter tier gets you ad-free early access to both video and audio versions of Mulligan Brothers interviews 24 hours before it goes public. The executive tier gets you everything that a supporter tier gets, plus more. Exclusive interviews and behind the scenes content, walk and talks, daily routines, unreleased interviews, the stuff that you don't see anywhere else. And finally, the executive producer tier. Everything from the supporter tier and the executive tier, plus exclusive perks. Access to our treatment packages. Be the first to see which guests are coming up and get insight into the topics we'll be discussing before anyone else. And you'll even get an executive producer credit on every single documentary that we make. So if you've ever wanted to support the Mulligan Brothers mission of inspiring change so we can go around the world and get these stories that nobody else will, this is exactly how you do it. Go to patreon.com/Mulligan Brothers or click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Join the community and help us inspire change.